Nick Dooms, Assistant City Engineer.
Joe Eichstead, City Engineer.
Paul Vollert, Public Works Superintendent.
Tom Marion, 4th District Alderman.
Sherry Evanson, District 5.
Dennis Pollock, member of the committee.
Patrick Delaney, District 7.
All right, thank you, everyone. The meeting is now called to order. Item number 2, review Engineering and Street Department Monthly Activity Report. Paul, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Apologize, I did not email that to you last week. Will be in your email here today. But start off, Kurt Rosenthal, he was an employee for us for just over 10 years. His last day is actually Monday, but he's been on vacation here for the last 2.5 weeks. But Kurt came to us from the mill, was a very talented welder, had lots of different jobs and skill sets that he did. So he, if you remember back when Joe Terry used to bring some stuff, he did a bunch of welding for us on different projects, saved the city some fair amount of money. So wish him well, and so that's one of the vacancies that we're in the process of filling. Otherwise, our construction projects are moving along well. Our Cherry Street, Smith Street area, that project is completed. Fremont Avenue between 14th and 13th is completed. And the 9th Avenue, all the underground stuff is completed. The curb and gutter was just finished yesterday. So we'll start to do the restoration and finish grading here in the weeks to come. We are over on Fremont between 7th and 10th, dealing with the situations over there. And actually we're out here on Jackson Street doing phase 2 of the Jackson Street project. Street maintenance wise, we worked with engineering department and the contractor doing the curb and gutter maintenance the last month. We also completed our chip sealing preparation and the actual surface sealing, 41,000 square yards. Pretty much the area that was completed was from the river to 8th Street, the expressway to Grand, and then Gainer Avenue and 25th Avenue over on the west side. We also worked with Wood County Highway in the town of Grand Rapids and did the gravel haul for that Chestnut Street project from 23rd Street to 32nd Street that we approved. I believe that was last month, maybe 2 months ago. So that part of the project is done. We're going to be putting the shoulder on that this week yet, and then that project itself will be completed. So otherwise, our paint shop, we continue to fight the shortage of paint. So we've got off of our second shift and been doing stuff during the day, but we continue to paint when we can. Also continue to work on the the no parking sign ordinances and bringing things up to date on what was approved back in March. In our shop, we have not had any major repairs. Spent the majority of the time getting our fleet ready to do our chip sealing, installing hitches and checking tailgates. And then once we got that completed, taking it back so that it's normal use, and then just normal vehicle maintenance of our fleet, the fire department, and police department. That's just a good highlight of what we completed in August.
Thanks, Paul. Any questions at all? Hearing none, we'll move on to engineering. Joe or Nick?
So for the month of August, the engineering department update, we've had our grid smart cameras on A Street, had the software updated, hopefully correct some of the detection issues that we've been having over there at Pepper Avenue and Airport Avenue. We've got a couple items in the report that are agenda items for this evening, so I'll brush over those for now. Regarding the lining work, sewer lining work that's going to be happening, a couple spot liners that we're doing, lining segments. We have one coming up proposed for next week on Chestnut Street. There'll likely be a road closure notice sent out for that. In addition, we're nearly completed with 9th Street South preliminary survey, and then preparing another job to try to complete that survey for prior to winter. In addition, we did hire an engineering technician, Sherry Libby, who started with the engineering department on September 6th. And Last week, we had some underwater river wall investigative work completed by J.F. Brennan on the east river bank in the downtown area, the stone masonry wall that's there. So they did their investigation, still waiting on their report, but I'll include an update on that as soon as we have it. Our survey and design work for the mid-block crossing, PED crossing on 32nd Street, that's complete, and we're preparing to coordinate the work to be completed in September. In addition, I did include the latest project update, which includes an update for the West Jackson Street project. We did have the construction staging switch over last week and open the segment of West Jackson Street that was currently closed. And so that's now open to traffic, and closed the section from 6th Avenue to the Expressway. So that switchover seemed to go fairly well. And that concludes the engineering report.
Thank you. Any questions on engineering? Hearing none, we'll move on to item 3, review the traffic study at 13th Street South and Peach Street, and consider modifying the traffic control signage. Joe?
So I could run through real quick on the review of the traffic study.
Yes, please.
So included in the packet, of course, is the intersection study that was performed. There's a variety of different things that we look at with these. We look at accident history, we look at visibility at the intersection. We look at the speeds of the vehicles that travel that section of roadway. So we did have some monitoring equipment out there for a period of time. The speeds are within reasonable numbers, 26, 27 miles per hour, at least approaching the intersection. Traffic counts, there's on average about 114 vehicles per day that travel through the intersection. We take all that information and review it against the engineering policy for the installation of yield signs and stop signs. And that policy is based on the manual of uniform traffic control devices, as well as the Wisconsin DOT supplement, which is adopted by the City of Wisconsin Rapids Ordinance, Chapter 340. Based on that, the review of everything that we've looked at, and the matrix that's included in there in Table 3, there is one correction to the report, that for the accidents that we looked back 10 years, there was one recent accident that occurred in March of this year that was a right angle accident. So at least reportable accidents on record, we have one accident in the last 10 years, one occurring in the last 12-month period. Through the review process, in looking at the warrants, typically we'd need two parameters in the yield sign category to recommend installing a yield sign at that location. So the recommendation coming out of our study is that no additional signage is needed.
Thank you. Any questions for Joe? Comments?
Mr. Chairman, how do you want to handle this? Do you want the property owners to make any comments at this time, or?
If there are any property owners here that would like to speak to
they
this,
are.
I would
They're
recognize them if they choose to speak.
You know?
Yeah. Please give your name and address, please. Sure.
In July of this year.
In July of this year?
Yep.
Okay. So I've been at 240 13th Street South since August of 2017, and I witnessed the one that you're discussing, the accident that just happened recently, but we've had other collisions in that intersection. So I don't know if they just didn't result in, something happening where it was a, litigation or insurance, but that's not the first time people have struck each other. I have a camera up now in the front. Literally, we see children almost hit by usually speeders that go through, especially the 13th Street South intersection is our primary, and yeah, that's the primary area of speeding. So on camera, I have near misses all the time. I mean, it's just, it triggers that, so I see it all the time. We thought that we could reach out to ask for additional help getting some kind of signage there, so there's repercussions to these individuals that are flying through that intersection. They come off of East Grand, and half the time they're not even stopping there, to be honest. So I have children. There's another 11 to 12 children that I know of in that small area. At least, if they do ignore some kind of signage, at least there's repercussions. We realize we can't have an officer there every day on the corner watching speeders, but at least they're, and we know that they might ignore a sign, but if they do, a little something happens to them at least this way, and so we would really appreciate that. I'm not disagreeing with what you guys have. I just know that every night at around 8 o'clock we have somebody go through about 14 times, and it's not 27 miles an hour. So when we have a little boy who's going through on his scooter and he doesn't look because he's 4, and he gets missed by, and pardon my term, a butt hair, yeah, I don't want that to be a child. So I think that a sign is a small price to pay for the life of a child. So, thank you.
May I ask a question of
Yeah.
you? What is it that you were recommending? Are you recommending stop signs on all 4? Or are you a yield sign on one? Or what is
Well,
it that you're recommending?
I guess yield signs on 13th is like the bare minimum, but I would love to see yield signs on both sides. We get it from both angles. Peach and 13th is just a hellhole over there. Because everybody's coming off of either A Street, Hall and Butt, and I would like to say that the yield signs have done good on the way down, but they really don't, and so that becomes the problem. And the police are aware of this as well. I mean, we've started as a neighborhood, kind of watching for particular offenders, reoffenders, I guess. But yeah, coming off of East Grand, same thing. They're coming down from Baker to East, and they're just hauling ass, and then they're coming from 8th doing the same thing. So it would be nice to have it from both, but 13th is the majority of our issue. So, and the majority of where the kids are crossing. There's a bus stop just up from there. So I also would help slow things down for that. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Is that
Any other questions or comments?
Well, a little bit more here. I've got the 3 reports here from the police department.
Yeah.
I talked to Chief DeWitt the other day on if they had, the police department had any problems with it. They do not. And if you go from 8th to 16th on Peach, now there's 2 open intersections. One of them is the one that we're looking at right here on 13th. The other one is at 10th. Everything else either has stop signs or yield signs. And I think that it just makes sense, especially with the problems that they have in that neighborhood. And I only live a block away. I know exactly what she's talking about. There is a problem there. But what we're looking at is at least a yield signs stopping on, at least on 13th Street anyway. Because if you're on 14th, you're coming from a yield sign, you got 2 blocks till you hit 12th. And some people are very good about it, others, they could care less. But there is a problem at that intersection, so I certainly like to see the yield signs go in.
Patrick?
I just have a question for Joe. Is there something that makes this intersection unique to the other uncontrolled intersections around the city?
The only thing that we noted that would, I guess, make it somewhat unique is that it's uncontrolled amongst other controlled intersections. Now, I don't know the history on how traffic control got installed and improved at the intersections adjacent to this one. My guess would be that it would be it was a similar sort of process where, you know, there was a concern at a particular intersection, because it would seem odd that they'd leave one intersection uncontrolled. So that's, I guess, one unique instance. As far as other instances like this, there's 9 or 10 other intersections that we quickly looked at that are similar to this, uncontrolled amongst other controlled. We have more uncontrolled intersections than just 9 or 10, but at least 9 or 10 that are similar to this one.
Any other questions or comments for Joe?
Chairman.
Sherry?
So Joe, if we, like you said that, so this one intersection is uncontrolled, but ones around it do have yield signs or stop signs on all-way?
Yeah, there are yield and stop controlled intersections adjacent to this one.
So it wouldn't be out of the ordinary, maybe if we put one here, then it would match what's around there?
It would. I would beg the question for the other 9 or 10 that are similar to this one, you know, how we should, you know, at least consider reviewing those in the future. You know, that's the one anomaly.
I mean, I know there's a lot of other uncontrolled intersections. I mean, no stop on either of them that I travel through. And I just think, I don't know if people just are more careless drivers nowadays and drive faster than years past. You know, it came to common sense. You didn't see a yield sign or stop sign. You know, basically everyone kind of just slowed down and you looked and you went through. But I don't see that as the case as much anymore. So I don't know. If it makes sense, I don't know what a yield sign's going to do because people fly through yield signs as well. So I don't know if it would make sense to do a stop sign to match the rest of them to slow traffic down, especially if there's a bus stop up ahead.
So ideally, in doing this review and kind of preparing for this meeting, ideally, with these situations, it'd be nice to look at an entire block or neighborhood and make determinations on where the traffic is naturally flowing. You know, like, for instance, Peach Street in this instance, that carries more traffic than 13th. And so, you know, at least taking that into consideration and making adjustments affords us a little bit more, I guess, flexibility to adjust the traffic control to meet that criteria on how we want traffic to flow and where we need the control. When we look at just an isolated intersection, we're stuck to just looking at the intersection and does it meet the warrants or not to have an elevated type of control. In theory, the less control, the better. But certainly you want to match the control, the type of control for the situation. If you have a certain level of traffic, vision, obstructions, I mean, you can see in the matrix on kind of the threshold on the next level of control. And that's there for a reason. But, yeah, so at this point, I guess it's the, you know, it's at the committee's discretion. Yeah, we used to use the road counters, the road tubes. Now it's a microwave detector. It's about this big. We put it on a power pole, and it's largely unnoticeable.
So, and I mean, I understand what you're saying about other intersections, you know, people haven't had issues, but if people are having issues, I mean, we brought just the two of us, because we're not the only people in the neighborhood. And there's numerous police reports, speeding tickets that have been issued. I don't know if you've looked into that, but I have copies of those. If that helps you guys in the future to make a decision. There's been over 50 speeding tickets on that road that's been given.
So my personal experience, I am not a fan of uncontrolled intersections at all. I think, like Sherry stated, it goes back to a time when people were a little bit more considerate when they were driving. So, Joe, are you saying that more of a study, more of a comprehensive study to understand where to properly place the signage is kind of needed in this scenario?
Well, I guess what I was trying to say is that, when we have one anomaly, one unique intersection like this amongst a bunch of others, that, we're kind of stuck from a review process and just looking at this one intersection. We're not looking at making modifications to the intersections adjacent to it. And so, that's kind of where the limit of our review went. In an ideal situation, I think we get, when we look at other intersections surrounding it and maybe consider making modifications to the neighborhood or that block, that it affords us a little bit more flexibility in the review process.
So to me, that makes a lot of sense, and I think it makes a lot of sense for these other locations that are also similar to this. So what would you need from us as a committee to get the ball rolling on that?
To do a bigger review and consider changing traffic control at other intersections?
Correct.
I guess just time. I mean, it all takes time.
Yeah. I mean, the last thing we want to do is just place signage, where some folks feel fit. I think there needs to be the science behind it, like you're explaining. So I just don't want to throw a sign there and think that it's going to fix the issue, because there's signs up and down these roads and there's still an issue. So to me, this seems like it's a bigger issue than just this particular intersection.
Perhaps it could be. I mean, I usually try to take it a step further, and if yield signs are the solution, well, if we put yield signs everywhere, is that going to fix all the problems? Or stop signs, and obviously the result of that kind of mind experiment, it's not always an answer. Maybe in this particular situation, yield signs would operate just fine, and maybe provide a level of safety to reduce some of the accidents. It's hard to say, but that's where our reviews, we're kind of locked into the policy that we have to work with. Yeah.
So can you explain to me, who is liable in a scenario like that where there is no signage on either side if an accident occurs? How is that determined?
So so in particular, the accident that occurred in March, it was a right angle accident. So I mean, it's definitely an accident you want to try to prevent if you can. But you always want to yield to the person on your right, I believe, is the kind of the rules of the road.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, we'll kick this back to the committee. Any more questions or comments for Joe? Hearing none, what are your wishes?
Well, I'm going to make the motion to recommend the yield signs on 13th and Peach. I could go into a little history of how some of these signs got there over the years, but I don't think that's what we're here for, but I really think in this case, a yield sign here will probably do some good under the circumstances. Like I say, if you look at Peach from 8th to 16th, just about every one of them has signs one way or the other, except 10th and this one here. So again, my motion is to recommend the yield signs.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any other discussion? Hearing, oop. Joe?
Just looking for clarification on the motion, which side would be controlled in that particular instance. Yield signs are controlled two sides of the or two directions on the same street, so it would differ from an all-way stop.
Mr. Chair, I'm recommending yield signs for the traffic on 13th Street on both sides of Peach. So I'm looking at 2 yield signs.
Yeah.
And basically to be put on 13th Street.
Does that make it clear, Joe? Okay. Sherry?
I have just one question, Joe. So if they would go on 13th Street, the yield signs, is that in correlation to what the other streets would have? Do you know? I mean, are there yield signs on 14th? I mean.
Yeah, it's
how?
It's a combination of yield and stop signs in that entire block between 12th and 16th and Grand and Chestnut. It's kind of a combination. They're somewhat sporadic, but.
Because I'm just looking, like you said, Peach Street had the higher count. So that's where I'm just trying to figure out if we did a yield sign, where would it make more sense the way that the traffic's going, I guess.
Yeah, so it would, if we were to recommend a yield sign on a staff level, that's what we'd recommend is on 13th, just because there's more traffic that would use Peach Street.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any more discussion? Hearing none, we'll go to vote. All in favor, respond with aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. Okay, we'll move on. Item number 4, review and request to establish a quiet zone for train horns on the east side of the city. Joe?
So I can run through some background information. A lot of this was compiled based upon prior instances where it was on a Public Works Committee agenda. Just to provide some background on how quiet zones are established and what the requirements are. So typically, quiet zones require at least a half mile of track. They have to be a half mile in length in order to qualify. All crossings within that half mile or greater have to have flashing lights and gates. And then the gates, along with any other what they call supplementary safety measures that would be installed, need to reduce the risk at the intersection down below either to either fully compensate for the loss of the train horn or reduce it to below a nationwide average that the Federal Railroad Administration determines on an annual basis. So some of the supplementary safety measures that can help aid in reducing the risk are installation of medians, channelization, one-way streets, 4-quadrant gates, grade separation, and potentially closing the street either temporarily or permanently. There's a variety of paperwork to apply for a quiet zone. Those quiet zones, once established, are subject to a 3 or 5 year review to make sure that they're still meeting the safety criteria. And then at any time, that I guess one caveat is an operator of an engine, if he determines that there's a need to still blow the train horn, even though it's in a quiet zone, they still have discretion to be able to do that for safety purposes. So on the east side of the city, there are 5 crossings, one at First Street North, 26th Street North, Kingston Road, 32nd Street, and then another one at Wallace Road. From 2016 numbers, we were looking at a proposed improvement cost in excess of $700,000 to get to the necessary safety level in order to request a quiet zone. I guess that kind of summarizes the information that we have. There's other information that's in the packet that was presented at other meetings. Otherwise, certainly happy to answer any questions.
Go ahead, Sherry.
Joe, the city of Marshfield has had quiet zones for quite a while. Have you experienced, and I'm sorry, I'm unprepared, I didn't make my phone calls, but have you heard of anything, I mean, because it's a significant cost, obviously, to go into the quiet zones, as we just heard. And if we have a train conductor that still feels they need to blow their horn, it's like, what are we spending all that money for? But have you heard on a professional level of any instances where that is a problem in the city of Marshfield?
I haven't heard of any. You know, typically once the quiet zone is established, I haven't heard of instances where it has been revoked or that they continue to blow their horn even though the quiet zone is in place.
And then one other question, I know when reviewing the material, there are recommendations, you know, you had your, the gates. Now, like the gates that are on East Grand and on First Street, or First Street, the poles that come down and block the streets and the you know, the blinking lights, the permanent statues, those wouldn't need to be replaced, right? Or is it a different type of gate that would have to be?
No, those could stay in place. It's just that each crossing in a quiet zone at least has to have the flashing lights and gates.
So,
Go ahead. So that's a minimal requirement. And then if you look at the safety that you get from every crossing having flashing lights and gates, are you at the at or below the national threshold? And if you haven't quite met that, you can still deploy other options, like the medians or 4-quadrant gates if you needed to increase the safety and reduce the risk.
okay. In doing so, I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself, but so we did the recommendation for the study on West Grand for the quiet zones. And it only makes sense to me, I guess, if we're going to do it in the city, why not do it citywide instead of just west side, east side? But if we have gates and lights at a lot of the intersections, I know, like you said, on West Grand, the medians are in there. Obviously, that's a much bigger intersection there. The report that on the west side, how would we do that for the east side? Or is tying them together, I guess, if that makes any sense? Sorry.
Yeah, they may be separate quiet zones, you know, 2 separate applications. But, you know, if they were applied for and approved, you know, then you'd have quiet zones throughout most of the city. Where it becomes hard and really expensive is the intersections that don't have, the grade crossings that don't have the flashing lights and gates, because I think that, and these are dated numbers, but I think that what CN had provided me, and it's CN's cost, they set the cost for the flashing lights and gates and do the installation, but they gave a very round number. I believe it was around $250,000, and that was likely back in 2016. So presumably they're more expensive today.
and I'm trying to find it, I think I found it here. So, okay, oh, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. This is the West Grand, with the grant money, the DOT grant money.
Oh, yeah, that's the next item.
Okay, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. But yeah, to me, it makes sense to do it citywide. I mean, I've, heard from many residents, I know people that live there, I mean, some of those are a lot closer to residential homes, like Tom was talking about, than West Grand Avenue. So that would just be my recommendation. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Joe? Anything, Tom?
Not a whole lot. Actually, the gentleman who did call me the last time and why I did turn this in, but he's not here this evening. He's a truck driver, so I don't know if he's not back in town yet or whatever. He was going to try to make it to the meeting, but there is the blowing of the horns. I can testify to that. 3 in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, and that type of stuff. And it's just, there seems to be more of it, and I know it's, over the years, we've talked to the railroad company about engineers trying to not blow it as often or as long or whatever, but, it just goes with the nature of the beast, I guess, is one might like to hear the sound of it himself, so he'll lay on it longer. Instead of the toot, it's a long blow on it. And so we can't regulate that necessarily. So that's why it's to look at again at quiet zone to see if that is what the city would like to do. Over the years, I've had a few calls off and on, probably every year about that. And we've looked at it. It's expensive to get into, but is it something that would be worthwhile? Again, I don't know. There has been some talk by the gentleman who called me of maybe that if there's expansion at the mill up there or whatever, there could be more rail traffic even yet. So I'm just, I guess I'd like to see the city look into at least doing this quiet zone.
Anything else from committee? So Joe, one of the categories, if you will, to establish a quiet zone is a minimum track length of 0.5 miles. Obviously that's covered. I don't believe the initial referral covered all these lines down to First Street, but I do agree that between the west side that we're currently looking at and the rest of the city, it would be fair to give every crossing within the city a shot at this. So to me, I think to continue assessing this as a potential project would be in order.
I just had one question. I know, so we have a DOT grant that could pay for some of the west side. Is there a time limit of when we need to use that? If we wanted to pull east and west, the entire city together?
So that DOT grant is specifically related to the roadway traffic and the traffic signals and the safety integrated in with the railroad. So when a train approaches the road crossing, it communicates to the traffic signal. It puts in a different program, triggers a different program in the traffic controller, and so it's all related to the roadway traffic. None of the improvements are actually occurring with the railroad. But certainly, if we were, and I think when this was originally brought before the committee for its initial review, I think in 2009, whenever we were going to do any improvements on any of the roads at grade crossings, that we'd look at the medians, we'd look at putting in some of the supplementary safety measures that, were easy and affordable to do at the time that things were getting rebuilt. So I guess it was a long answer, but short answer is that grant is not specific to quiet zones that I'm aware of.
Okay, any other discussion on this topic?
Tom, the man here that turned in the referral here, is he, obviously must be just a trained, is he here mainly from when they're switching, from the sound coming from the west side, or, I mean, is it throughout the day, or just certain times of the day?
Well, I think basically where you get the complaints, wherever it's at, is that it's the sound of the horn. The concern is at night. Basically that, that midnight to 6 a.m. or something like that. That's basically where the people are complaining about. At 3 in the afternoon, you don't seem to get those complaints. I guess I haven't heard that. I don't think. Spent the night.
I haven't heard too many of them lately, but a lot of times early in the morning you would hear them. I think they were switching or whatever they were doing. But then my question would be, I don't know what good it would do, but has anybody approached the railroad and see if they can do something about it? I know there's reasons they blow their horn, but I don't know. Who would handle that? Can you handle that out of your?
I think that they are, they're somewhat obligated to blow their horns at the grade crossings. I don't know that they would forego that. It's part of their safety measures that when they approach a road, they're on.
Well, that's what I understand too, but.
And in the only instances that they would forego it is if there's an established quiet zone that accommodates for the safety.
Essentially upgraded signals, traffic signals.
The rails, the grade crossing
Right.
equipment. Yep.
Right. Okay, we're gonna move on. Item number 5, review the bid results for the West Riverview Expressway Traffic Signal Improvement Project and consider awarding the contract to the low qualified bidder with scope revisions. Who's on this one? Joe?
So handed out prior to the meeting, just immediately to the meeting, I did make revisions to the referral document. The primary reason was after discussions with the city attorney, one of the options that we thought might be available to the city turns out that it is not something that the city should pursue based upon her recommendation in the League of Wisconsin Municipalities. But in any case, we did open bids. We received one bid from Pembroke Companies for $793,617.05. The engineering estimate was at $465,000 roughly. So significant difference there, and our DOT grant amount is $535,000 in total. And so when you take out the consulting engineering fees, we're right back down to that engineering estimate of around $465,000. So I included the items where, there were some major unit price discrepancies from what we were anticipating. Those are identified there just for informational purposes. But I guess the options that are available to us at this point are we could, if we can find the funding to do the project, we could continue with the safety improvements at the bid price of $793,000. Certainly, we'd have to discuss that with finance and probably other committees in the council. The other option is to deny the bids and perhaps consider rebidding the project again, but at a reduced scope level, which would, the original project included work at Chase Street, West Grand, and High Street, and a reduced scope would essentially remove the work at Chase Street and High Street from the project and just focus on the improvements at West Grand.
Thank you, Joe. Sherry?
So Joe, if we were to say, you know, we want to do the entire city and not just focus just on the west side, and have them rebid everything. I mean, obviously, I know the cost would be higher because we have more intersections, but would it be cheaper in the long run, I mean, to do the entire city?
So yeah, this project in this, it's an ITS signals grant through the state. So the state set funds aside specifically to reduce traffic accidents. And so these three intersections we identified as, after the railroad came through and did a bunch of improvements to their rail a few years ago, we had the state traffic engineer involved, we had the Federal Railroad Administration involved, and that particular instance showed some of the deficiencies in our traffic control at those intersections. And given that the local DOT traffic engineer was involved in that, when we applied for the grant, it made it easier for the DOT to put money towards the city's traffic control system to make improvements to reduce accidents at these intersections. So it is entirely different than a quiet zone. It is somewhat related to the rail because it's directly adjacent to and tied into our traffic signals, but it is separate.
And that is a 2022 grant, so is there a time limit? I mean,
So you might recall we bid it out initially a couple months ago and we didn't receive any bids. We modified the contract, tried to reach out to contractors more thoroughly, and we even extended the bid time because there was contractors that were on vacation. So we made every attempt to extend the construction schedule into 2023 to make sure that wasn't a concern of theirs as far as timing. And we otherwise left the scope intact with the three intersections. We did get the one bid, however, it's a significant cost increase.
but is it more appropriate to what we need instead of reducing the scope?
It would still allow the safety project to move forward. We did talk with the DOT as far as our flexibility and what we could do could we modify the scope, and could we do the work in 2023? Is that still an option for the city? In both cases, the DOT said yes, that's perfectly fine to reduce the scope. In fact, the next round of applications is actually due tomorrow, and so we could apply for the other two intersections, reapply for those, to have those hopefully get grant funding in the future.
I would be in favor of that. I think that would be a good idea.
It almost sounds like a motion.
Yeah. I just hate for us to lose the chance for that, to continue to, make it safer in the long-term quiet zones. I mean, just putting everything together in a bigger picture, I guess, for the future.
Anything, Dennis?
Just one question here, Joe. Just what do you expect out of an upgrade? What are you really looking for? I mean, for safety, so everything works the way it's supposed to, or?
Yeah,
I mean, what are you getting
primary-
here?
Primary outcome is increased safety. I guess secondary to that is updated equipment that operates better and accommodates the traffic better.
Can you do any of your adjusting here from City Hall by any chance?
Oh, yeah, we're currently set up to be able to monitor and make adjustments from City Hall. It's largely, so part of the improvements are replacing some of the traffic signals, the actual poles and lights, and going with flashing yellow arrows. So we have one at Lincoln Street and the Expressway for the left turn arrows, the yellow flashing arrow. There's a lot of increased safety with that. That's one thing that the DOT specifically said had to stay in the scope, and that was expressly at the West Grand Avenue intersection. So with the proposed scope modifications, that would stay in the project. But yeah, a lot of the equipment that's out there, the wiring and the signal heads and stuff are original install. So some of this project is, we get an ancillary benefit of improving that, replacing that old infrastructure and improving things. Primarily those, the safety.
Is that somewhat of a guarantee that the complaints will go down? That you don't have to answer that one, but I mean, are they going to be synchronized better than what they are at times?
Largely, the timings won't be modified. It's not really complaint driven for this project. It's solely the increasing the safety, so reducing accidents, and replacing outdated equipment.
Okay, thank you.
Joe, can you speak to if we do modify the scope and indeed drop off Chase and High Street, reapplying for that grant for those intersections? What does your gut tell you on that? Is that something that could potentially come our way, or hard to speak to?
Hard to speak to. Certainly the DOT thought it was worth funding collectively with all three intersections. I think that with the preemption timing with the railroad and the interconnect there and the improvements with that communication, that will still be looked at closely by the DOT for improving that situation. The DOT did, talking with the lady that administers that program, she recommended us reapplying if we still wanted to do those two intersections. So.
Okay. And can you speak to these improvements? Would they at all affect the grading of the crossing for, say, like a quiet zone?
They would not impact the grade crossings. The scope of these improvements, they're largely, the concrete work that's involved in them is only insofar as replacing poles and installing new wiring. There aren't any other hard surface type improvements other than that.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Patrick?
I've got a list of really stupid questions, but that's typical for me. I'm just trying to figure out, okay, this is for equipment, correct? Like the engineering has already been completed, it says. Is that correct? The engineering is all
Yep.
done on this already?
It is, yes.
So it's just replacing the equipment at each, so the labor and equipment?
Largely, yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And so I'm just trying to figure out how your estimates are one thing, and then when it comes back, it was twice as much or 3 times as much. I mean, has the equipment gone up that much, or is it in the time of the year that we're asking for proposals? Like if we did this in a month or two, would we get better
It's hard to say. One of the items that's part of the scope of the project are the monotube poles. Just to give you an idea on the supply chain and the backlog on some of these items, the city purchased those directly for the West Grand Avenue intersection back in early April, I believe, with an expected delivery sometime in October. Now, I haven't had any updates from the supplier recently, so I could see that getting pushed back to November, December, perhaps. Electrical components in general have been delayed significantly, but it seems to be that it depends on what the items are and perhaps where you're getting them from. In addition to that, the two primary electrical contractors that would work on this sort of project, neither of them seem to be very interested in it. And then in addition, electrical contractors don't usually, they aren't usually the prime bidder for projects. So hence the reason Pembroke Companies was willing to, well, we'll do the prime, we'll be the prime on the project and just have the electrical as a sub, which electrical is going to be doing, the bulk of the work.
Okay, before you had stated that the railroad does the installation of their own signals and stuff. Is this separate from the number 4 that we had just discussed?
Yes, it is separate. These signals that are referenced in this grant are specific to the vehicle traffic signals.
Oh.
And in the other one with the quiet zone, that's specific to the grade crossing and the flashing lights and gates.
All right, that helps. I told you there were going to be dumb questions. Thank you for listening.
Anyone else? Jerry?
So I guess I'm just kind of confused. I don't know if I'm the only one. So either we agree to the bid for the 793,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
For the whole scope, which is considerably more. But with that price, we'd get the 535,000 towards that for the grant? Or is that?
Yeah, so the $535,000 grant, that's a 90% DOT cost and 10% city cost. And so we're obligated for 10% of that value. Anything above that amount, the city would be responsible 100%. And so being able to modify the scope, we can get the project cost back down close to what we're anticipating, back into the grant amount, and at least maintain our, more closely hit our budget anyway, and maximize the 90-10 grant advantage.
So if we just do enough to get by, which is typical that we do, but if that's what the funding is, and then we want to do more, let's say we use ARPA funds, then we would just build on that? I guess I'm just confused at what this, like the scope, like what are we decreasing, or we're only going to do, pick out pieces that we're going to do?
So we would do the scope modification, the scope reduction, everything that we plan to do at West Grand, we would continue to do. What we hope to do at Chase Street and High Street, we would postpone and reapply to do everything that we hope to do in the future.
Okay.
So at least at West Grand, we wouldn't be sacrificing any of the proposed improvements that we were going to accomplish.
But instead of doing all 3, we're just going to focus on West Grand for now.
Correct.
And then
scope
reapply.
Yep.
We could direct staff to reapply for the grant for High and Chase Street.
Yep.
Okay, I make a motion for that.
Okay, so let's make sure it's clear. A motion to award the project to the low qualified bidder contingent upon a modified scope. And then we have that listed here. A, the modified scope allows the city to ensure the safety of the project. The modified scope removes the improvements at Chase Street and High Street. And it said the DOT approves the scope, so. Does that do it for the motion?
Just a recommendation that perhaps you'd want to deny the bid and propose, well, I guess, if we're doing a scope modification, we'd need to deny the bid and rebid the project at a reduced scope level.
Taking out High Street and Chase Street?
Correct.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, that's just confusing because item 3 on the options available says award the project based on the low qualified bidder contingent upon a modified scope.
Yeah, I apologize for that. So I had handed out a revised.
Oh,
document.
sorry, okay.
And
okay.
so that item, that option 3 had to be removed.
Okay, I'm looking at the old version, sorry.
So if we deny the bid, rebid the project with just West Grand, removing Chase and High Street, and doing the scope level at West Grand that we need, still using the grant money that we have,
Correct.
that's what would make sense that you would recommend, I guess.
Yep.
Okay, so that's the motion?
It can be.
I'd make a motion, yes, to deny the bid, rebid it, reducing the scope, removing Chase and High Street, using the DOT grants for that. And then working with the DOT to apply for the grant, additional grant money for High Street and Chase Street.
And I'll second that.
Okay.
Any other discussion? I already seconded. I beat you to it, Dennis. Yep. Hearing no more discussion, we'll go to vote. All in favor, respond with aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it.
Thank you, Joe.
All right, moving on. Where are we at here? Item 6, review the 5-year capital improvement plan. Joel?
So included in the packet is an updated draft of the list of capital projects for the next 5 years from 2023 to 2027. At this time last year, the committee reviewed the capital improvement plan during the months of September and October. So similarly, I think, a lot of this is just for information discussion purposes at this point. And then, any revisions or things to revisit next month, we can look for possible consideration approval in October. So typically, the way the projects are identified, they're based upon the asset type for sanitary, water main, storm sewer, and street, and then divided up or proportioned out by year based upon the mileage of road reconstruction that we're proposing. So as a general rule of thumb, we have a capacity of roughly reconstructing about a mile of roadway with underground utilities in a given year. So as you can see, the mileage that's identified, we're kind of bouncing around the 1 mile mark, maybe a little bit heavy in some cases. I also included a summary of the changes from the current CIP document on what's been modified and added. I won't go through each of those, but certainly if there's questions. The bigger items that we were looking at, trying to prepare for 2024 projects and starting to get some of our surveys completed yet this fall for those future projects. Now that ties in with the next agenda item for Lincoln Street. But in order to better accommodate impacts to adjacent streets and our rough 1 mile per year capacity, we're proposing to move McKinley Street from 8th Avenue to 14th Avenue. It's originally proposed in 2023 and moving that to 2025. Largely, we'd be substituting that project with Lincoln Street. It was originally proposed, Lincoln Street was proposed from Chestnut Street to East Grand, and we're proposing that to be adjusted from Peach Street, just south of East Grand, all the way down towards the expressway. Additionally, there was a wastewater requested project for rehabilitating, lining, replacing segments of the West Side Interceptor line and the sewer along Gaynor Avenue, that both of those tie into the city's West Side lift station. So included in the packet, we've got the spreadsheet that includes the list of the projects and associated details. I also included what was being proposed for the 2023 projects, along with the project summary reports for those projects. I can say over the last year, I have met with the GIS coordinator on several occasions to talk about utilizing GIS software and how we could utilize that, take advantage of it to help build our capital improvement plan. And then more recently, we've been working on the Janesville database, efforts with the finance department and the mayor to get that moving in the right direction. So there are some things that are the ball's moving, I guess, in regards to getting something that's a little bit more digestible and easier to consume. We will be mapping the list of 5-year projects. We'll map those out, and they'll be available on the city's GIS viewer online.
Any questions on the Public Works CIP? Hearing none, we'll move on to item 7, review a preliminary resolution for public work and improvements for Lincoln Street between East Riverview Expressway and Peach Street, proposed for construction in 2024. Joe?
So included in the referral, there's an image showing I guess the extents of the Lincoln Street project. I guess we'd be asking for a preliminary resolution from the committee that would authorize notice to the public of the upcoming improvements, as well as allowing kind of a milestone approval that would allow the engineering department to allocate resources to start the survey work and begin the topographic survey. Included in the packet is a draft of that preliminary resolution. It includes all of the proposed public works improvements and includes a list of all the parcel numbers that are affected by that future public works project.
Any questions for Joe on the preliminary resolution?
Make a motion to approve?
We have a motion to approve. And a second. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll go to vote. All in favor, respond with aye. Aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. Okay, moving on. Item number 8, review the referral list. Joe, you want to bring that up? Item 2, that's been on there for quite a while. Request by Alderperson Cattenau to reconsider the city's overnight parking ordinance. I know there's been some discussion on this and it's kind of fizzled. Is that something we want to have remain on the referral list and discuss here in the future, or where are we at as a committee here?
I think we could take it off. I know we had talked about it in depth, I think even on council, about allowing parking wherever all summer long.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we decided not to do that.
Anybody opposed to removing item 2 from the referral list? We can strike 2, Joe. 7 is ongoing. 10 is ongoing. Where are we at with item 11, Joe? Has there been anything done there at all?
No, we haven't done anything with item 11.
Okay, item 12 is ongoing. 13 we discussed tonight. And 14 can be striked. Stricken. And that should do it. Any questions or additions to the referral list?
Is there, just one thing, Chairman, ARPA funds, I know we haven't talked about that for a while, but I don't know, is it something that a department head would do, or to request a meeting to find out, you know, where those funds are, what we could use? I mean, we're doing 1 mile of road a year, which is very embarrassing to say, but I mean, how does that discussion happen, I guess?
I guess there could be a referral to the Public Works Committee to discuss the potential projects that were submitted. I guess I'm not sure, you know, those were originally submitted to the mayor's office and the finance director, and I'm not positive where that conversation's at.
I would say if you have a recommendation to get it to the mayor for consideration for those.
I agree.
Okay, next item on the agenda is set the meeting date. Next meeting date, looks like October 6th is the first Thursday. Or is the chambers open for that, Joe?
It is, yes.
So 5 p.m. Thursday, October 6th. Is that good with everybody? Sounds like it. And our final item is adjournment. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, respond with aye.
Aye.
Aye. Have a good evening, everyone.